The dining room echoed through the house like knives scratching glass. I kept my head down, gripping the edge of the serving tray so tightly my knuckles turned white. The china trembled slightly in my hands, but I forced myself to breathe. One step, another. I reached the dining room door. They didn't stop laughing. "There she is!" Aunt Valerie's sharp voice sliced through the air the second I stepped into the room. "About time. The roast's cold, maid." My cheeks flushed red. My legs stilled. "I said serve us quickly, maid," she barked again. My cousins burst out laughing. One even clapped. And the worst part? No one stood up for me. Not even my own mother. I swallowed back tears, not out of weakness, but fury. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the tray into her smug, powdered face, but I didn't, because I knew something they didn't. Something that would change everything. I set the tray down, silently. My aunt clicked her tongue and leaned over to whisper to her daughter, who snickered as if I were something foul in her teeth. My cousin Darren grinned. "Hey, maid," he said, loud enough for the whole table. "Can I get a refill? Or do you only serve failure?" Laughter erupted again. I glanced toward the main door. Any second now. "Honestly?" Valerie scoffed, swirling her wine like she owned the air in the room. "I don't even know why you invited her. She thinks she's one of us just because she... what? Lives off handouts?" That did it. My grip on the pitcher tightened. "You know what I think?" she went on, sipping like royalty. "We shouldn't let family like her eat at the same table. It lowers the standard. She's not one of us. She's just..." The front door clicked. My spine straightened. All heads turned. Heavy boots echoed through the marble floor like judgment. The air stiffened. The kind of quiet that comes before a storm. And then... he walked in. Tall, composed. Clean military lines in his decorated officer's uniform. The golden U.S. Army insignia glinting under the chandelier light. Every step was silent power. My husband, Captain Daniel Rourke. Their laughter? Gone. Like it had never happened. My aunt's mouth hung open. My cousin blinked. My mother stood up like she'd just seen a ghost. Daniel's eyes met mine. And then, he walked straight up to me, wrapped his arm gently around my waist, and kissed my forehead. The silence was deafening. He turned toward the table, gaze sweeping across every face like a commander before a firing squad. "Evening," he said calmly. "Hope my wife hasn't been treated like a servant again." Aunt Valerie stammered. I didn't..." "Oh, but you did," he cut in, his voice quiet, controlled, dangerous. I could feel their discomfort like heat rising in the room. None of them could look him in the eye. Not even Darren, who suddenly found interest in his fork. "I wasn't aware of family dinners here involved. Humiliating women who've achieved more with less support than any of you ever have," he continued. "But that ends tonight." Valerie flushed. Her hands trembled. "Daniel, you misunderstand." "No, I understand perfectly." I watched as my mother sank into her chair, her lips pressed thin. My aunt stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "Now," Daniel added, "if you'll excuse us, we have better company to be with." He took my hand, and we walked out. But that wasn't the end. Not even close. Because what came after that door closed would shatter their perfect little world. As we walked out that front door, the night air hit my skin like freedom. But inside me, a storm was brewing. Daniel squeezed my hand gently as we moved toward the car. "You okay?" he asked, opening the passenger door for me. I nodded, slipping in, but my silence was thick, heavy. He knew what it meant. He'd seen this look on me before, years ago, when I was scrubbing floors to pay rent, eating dollar store soup for dinner, and still smiling while my family pretended I didn't exist. They'd looked down on me for leaving college to work. for helping Mom when Dad left, for doing what they never had the strength to do. And now, they laughed like I was beneath them, like I was invisible. But they didn't know how far I'd come, how much I'd built, and how little they mattered anymore. "Where are we going?" I asked quietly once the car pulled away. He glanced at me. "Someplace where no one will call you maid." I smiled at that, a small one, but it burned with something fierce. The next morning, I opened my laptop and clicked upload. One click, and their world started to burn. It wasn't revenge, it was revelation. I'd recorded everything, their mockery, their laughter. The moment Daniel walked in. But more than that, I added the truth behind it, a 10-minute video. Just me. No makeup, no pretenses. Just a woman telling the truth. How I built my catering business from scratch. How I worked 18-hour days to survive. How I'd once offered free meals to struggling single moms, while my cousins bought designer bags with Daddy's money. How my aunt laughed at me while secretly hiring me to provide food for her corporate events. "Sometimes," I said in the video, "the people who mock you the loudest are the ones who fear you the most." And I ended it with one line. "My name is Madison Rourke. I'm not your maid. I'm your reminder that resilience terrifies cowards." By evening, it had 1 million views. I turned off my phone after the 6th media outlet called asking for interviews. But what came next? That hit them where it hurt. 3 days later, I returned to the same house. But this time, I wasn't carrying trays. I was signing contracts. Daniel pulled up in his military SUV. I stepped out in a navy blue business suit, heels clicking against the pavement like a warning bell. My posture didn't bend. My eyes didn't flinch. Inside, chaos. My aunt's phone rang nonstop. Reporters outside. Sponsors dropping her nonprofit like poison. Darren tried to act normal, sitting in the living room like nothing happened, but his face was pale. My mother? She stood in the corner, arms folded, not speaking. I walked straight into the dining room and dropped a folder on the table. "What's this?" Valerie asked weakly. I leaned in. "The purchase agreement," I said. "Your catering supplier just sold me full control." Her breath caught. "You're going to need new vendors," I added, "or you could grovel. But let's be honest, your pride won't survive that." I turned to walk away, but paused, and looked at her one last time. "I'm not the maid," I whispered. "I'm the storm you laughed at before it hit." And with that, I walked out. The door slammed shut behind me, but their downfall? It had only just begun. 2 days later, my inbox exploded. Messages from women across the country. Some waitresses, some single moms, some nurses. All saying the same thing. "Thank you for standing up." But that wasn't what shook me. What shook me was the message from my cousin Ashley. "I didn't know they treated you like that. I'm sorry. I should have said something." I didn't reply, because apologies don't erase years of silence. That morning, I met Daniel outside our warehouse, the hub of my catering company. He handed me a coffee and smiled. "Guess what?" "What?" He tapped his phone. "Valerie's charity just lost another 3 sponsors. They're pulling out after your video went viral." I raised a brow. "Shame. Maybe she should have hired a maid to handle PR." He laughed. "She wouldn't survive a day in your shoes." Later that afternoon, I arrived at a private fundraising gala, a massive event for veterans and community aid. And guess who was on the guest list? Valerie. She didn't know I'd be there, but she knew the second I walked in. The room shifted. Whispers rippled like electricity. Cameras turned. Reporters murmured. Valerie stood frozen, her fake pearls almost rattling. Darren stood beside her, expression blank. I walked up calmly. "Mrs. Rourke," the host greeted me, shaking my hand in front of everyone. Thank you for your generous donation. We're honored to have you. Valerie blinked. You donated? The host beamed. Oh yes, Madison's been supporting our outreach kitchens for years now. She's saved more lives than we can count. The look on Valerie's face? It was everything. Because in her world, reputation was gold, and mine just shined brighter than hers ever had. I looked her in the eye. Don't worry, I said with a calm smile. I won't tell anyone you used to call me the maid. She didn't respond. Because she couldn't. But the look in her eyes said it all. She knew her. Crown had slipped. And this time, I wasn't picking it up for her. The next morning, I was setting up at one of our food drive events, sleeves rolled, hands full, sweat on my brow, when a black car pulled up across the lot. I knew that license plate. Valerie stepped out slowly, wearing oversized sunglasses and a scarf like she thought someone might recognize her. She looked small. Not the woman who used to bark orders from her dining room throne. She approached cautiously, heels clicking on the sidewalk. Madison, she said, voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. Can we talk? I didn't stop working. About what? She hesitated. My sponsors are gone. My name's been dragged all over the internet. They're saying I run a toxic organization. I kept loading boxes. Sounds about right. I didn't mean it like that, she blurted. I was just joking. I looked up, slowly. You shouted at me, in front of everyone. That wasn't a joke, Valerie. That was cruelty in heels. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I need your help, she finally whispered. There it was. The mighty had fallen. You want me to clean up your mess? I asked. The maid job's still open? Her face crumpled. Please. I stared at her for a long second, then picked up a food bag and handed it to her. You want to fix your reputation? Start here. Hand those out. Help them. The people you used to ignore. She took the bag hesitantly, and that day, she stayed. All day. She handed out meals, smiled through judgmental stares, and when the last family drove off, she looked at me again, face flushed, hair messy, heels ruined, and for the first time ever, she looked human. You were right, she said, barely above a whisper. I don't know how you do it. I couldn't last 2 hours in your shoes. I nodded. I know. No forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe a beginning. Sometimes redemption doesn't come through tears. It comes through sweat, silence, and humility. A week passed, then another. I didn't hear from my family again until the invitation showed up. A fancy white envelope. My cousin Darren's engagement party. Gold lettering. Big names on the guest list. And one small note scribbled inside. Hope you'll come. Things haven't been the same without you. I showed it to Daniel. He smirked. You going? I shrugged. Should I? He leaned in, kissed my forehead. Only if you want them to see what real success looks like. So I went. But not in heels, not in glitter. I wore the same navy blue pantsuit from that day at the fundraiser. Clean, elegant, powerful. And I walked in with Daniel. Uniform crisp, arm locked with mine. The room hushed. Of course it did. There I was, the girl they once mocked, the maid, walking in like she belonged. Because I did. Aunt Valerie approached. Not smug, not bitter. Software. Madison, she said quietly. You look strong. I am, I replied simply. Darren came up next, sheepish grin on his face. Hey, look, about before. Don't, I cut in. I didn't come for apologies. He nodded quickly. Right. Of course. They didn't know what to do with me now, because when someone rises without their help, it threatens everything they believe in. Daniel stood beside me, calm as ever. People whispered, Some tried to smile, some stared. But I didn't care. I stood tall. Not to prove them wrong anymore, but because I'd finally stopped shrinking for people who never saw me clearly. As we were leaving, I passed by the same dining table they once laughed around. The memory still stung. But this time, I smiled. Because they knew now. I wasn't the maid. I was the storm